conversations that are taking place. As such, I will be sitting here at a computer looking incredibly rude, like I'm not paying attention to anything that Carrie is saying, but I am monitoring email and will pass on any questions. So anybody online who would like to ask a question, please email us at coreclinic1@gmail.com. For the in-person audience, the fact that we have an online audience means that we do have a little bit of a problem in terms of the discussions back and forth with Carrie, who tends to be a speaker who actually invigorates people to engage in a lot of discussion. Consequence of having this is one-way directional microphone. We actually need you to come up here so that you can be heard on the camera. So if you are engaging, please remember, and I'll probably remind you if you're forgetting or Carrie's forgetting, because even just behind Darcy, your voice won't be picked up. Okay?
How wide is the field of vision of the camera?
Quite wide, out to Carrie. Yeah.
And the screen.
And the screen.
So if you stand in front of the screen, you're fine.
Yeah. For people online or for people here you've picked up a printed copy of the handouts. Slides, if they're hard to read online, are available. I just posted them to the CoRe website. So you can go on there and you can download them. Same for anybody here if you want to get an online version of them. We've got a few upcoming events that I want to just mention really quickly. May 10th, definitely put that date aside because that is the day that we start dealing with the zombie apocalypse. It's absolutely critical that you be prepared. And part of that preparation is learning how to deal with those adversarial negotiators who are a whole lot like zombies in their approach. They have one way of going at things and that is it. And they just stagger on through. We want to talk about how do you adapt working with those people into a problem-solving model. So join us on May 10th for that one. June 7th, we have Sue Drinnen joining us, and she has disappeared just as I was going to ask her. So I'm going to skip over that on the anticipation that she will come back and give us a quick discussion about what her topic is. We're going to have a summer break. October 4th is when we're going to restart. But there's something that you'll be able to do before October 4th. We are going to be going to visit plays at the Fringe. And there are going to be a couple of us. The executive director of the Fringe and myself are both going to pick our favorite plays that we think have the strongest conflict resolution themes. And we won't have seen them, so we're going by what we know about the performers or what we know about things that they've done in the past. But we're going to each come up with a list, propose them as a viewing list, and then we're going to have a discussion about how going to the theater can help us with our conflict resolution thinking. Okay? So think about it. You will see the lists going out in the summer. Our next dates are going to be October 24th and November 15th. I'll just highlight them, put them on your calendars. And Sue, if you don't mind coming up, Sue Drinnen is just going to tell us what she's going to do on June 7th.
Yeah.
And if you're just over where I was.
Okay. So, hello. So I'm like Carrie, also an executive coach, and I'll be talking about neuroscience, and so choosing to be resilient by choice, and that's handling yourself, calming yourself down, and knowing what to do to diffuse the others, knowing the neuroscience behind it. So did you want anything more about that? It's a very interactive, lots of practice.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. And I think Carrie's going to be doing a little bit of that today, so we're going to have lots of carryover between the two, and I really think it'll be fantastic to hear both of them if you get an opportunity. I'm going to hand it over to Carrie Gallant now to talk about conversational intelligence.
Thank you. Thank you. So just in case, I think I know just about everybody in the room, but in case I don't know anybody online, Carrie Gallant, I'm on the board, been on the board of CoRe for about 10 or 12 years now. A coach, do executive business and leadership coaching, and I've also been a mediator since 1990, although I do a lot less mediation right now. So what I wanted to bring this to all of you was that I'm doing something really quite interesting on conversational intelligence, which takes some of the research in neuroscience and puts it squarely in the conversational realm. So how many of you are familiar or have done some work with emotional intelligence, for example? Yeah, so quite a few of you. So this is a little bit different in that it's taking some of the similar ideas of that, we have IQ, which is believed to be relatively fixed. We have the same IQ when we're young as we do when we're older. It's considered to be somewhat mutable or immutable, rather. But emotional intelligence, we know that are things that we can grow and we can develop and become more mature, more emotionally mature with our emotional intelligence. Well, same is true with conversational intelligence. And I'm involved in a program right now with a woman who's developed conversational intelligence, and that's Judith Glaser. And this is her book. By the way, if anybody's interested in doing more reading on this area after tonight, I highly recommend the book as a good place to go. And what I found really interesting about CIQ, the short form, is that it provides some tools and some way of thinking about and applying some of the learnings that we're getting from neuroscience, the brain science, and bringing it into the conversational world. And I also looked at it from the perspective of how can we use this as mediators, as third-party interveners. So although the program I'm in is developed for coaches, when we're working one-on-one with executives, businesses, and teams of people in the workplace, as a mediator, as a third-party intervener, how can we look at utilizing this? So I'm giving you an overview of what I've gained to date. I'm only halfway through the program, so there's still lots more, and I'm happy to come back with later parts, and I know Sue's going to probably pull a lot of it into more of a practical realm. Tonight we've got the distance as well, so I'm not focusing on doing exercises per se, but more bringing this forward as a dialogue, as some information. I can't see hands in the virtual world there, but how many of you here have some experience, exposure, have been reading around in the neuroscience in the last few years? Yeah, so good portion of the room. So some of this is probably not going to be new to you, but it might be presented in a different way. So Judith Glaser, who's Judith Glaser? And why should we care what she says, being one person? She calls herself an organizational anthropologist, and she's been doing work in the business world, applying what she's learned and studied from a neuroscience and from a communication and a co-creation aspect for about 37 years. So she's been at this world for a long time. So again, in organizations, she's grounded in organizations, using this work in large-scale organizations and with teams. And if we, in this room collectively, are conflict resolvers, whether we're mediators or lawyers, I'd say Judith is way over here, more in the conflict prevention side of things, although certainly in the realm of having high conflict. I mean, some of the people that she works with, and I know Sue works and sometimes I work with as well, are high conflict individuals. Like, these are leaders who are trying to get, a good message out and get their organizations going, but something's blocking them, and their message, their conversational CIQ may not be where they would like it to be. And so she's developed a lot of this stuff to bring that forward. So I thought it would be interesting to hear what she has to say. I have a short little clip so you can get a quick introduction to what she has to say about CIQ and how she came about it.
All right. So am I just...
Yeah, we're going to have to probably make it larger again once it gets to YouTube.
Wow, is this ever... Yours
That's
is
an
so
odd angle.
weird. So utterly different than mine.
How is that?
Everybody just sets their track pads.
It's a 2-minute clip.
Let me give you a definition of conversational intelligence, and the best that I can do it now. I know this is an evolving field. I know I'm authoring the first book in the field, but it's such a beautiful structure, framework for what I think is going to be research that we do for a long, long, long time, and how human beings connect. So conversational intelligence is the ability to connect, to navigate, and to grow with others. And when I say that, I'm saying because I literally mean growing with others. We now know that conversations have the ability to activate the part of our brain that is not only where we're receiving information or giving information, it's taking our brain to the next level of discovery about what's happening in the world. So it's expanding the networks in our brain to hold larger pictures and more complex pictures of what's happening around us. So as conversations, as we interact, we're literally building networks, frameworks, connections, capabilities into our brain. And now we know, and this is the most amazing research, that while we thought that the DNA that we were given when we were born is what we stay with forever, we now know that through conversations we're actually activating a different type of DNA, transcription DNA, so that there are parts of our DNA that are encoded to be impacted by the environment. So every conversation has a writing ability, transcription ability in our brain, which then elevates our brain to a higher level. We also now know that language is a FOXP2 gene, which is called a regulatory gene. which is part of the conversation of conversational intelligence. So as we interact, we trigger each other. If we trigger each other in ways that cause our amygdala or our lower brain to be activated, that causes certain networks to spin out fear hormones that close down our brain. So that's a piece of the story of conversations. It can activate us to go into protect behavior and close down. At the same time, conversations that make us feel good, that make us introspective in positive ways, that help us connect to another person, can trigger a whole different part of our chemistry. And that's where trust lives. And that's the prefrontal cortex, which is our executive brain or our newest, youngest brain, and the heart connection. That gets activated. And when that happens, it actually enables us to grow our intelligence. That's why I even use the word conversational intelligence. We're actually elevating the DNA in our humanity, and it gets transferred to the next generation. So conversational intelligence is the mode through which we learn, grow, evolve, and navigate with others.
So, what this work is doing too is conversational intelligence was named, I think, one of the top 5 business trends for 2016 by either Harvard Business Review or The Economist, one of those two. So there's a lot that's moving towards looking. I think it must be the next YouTube.
It is. Do we have a next YouTube? No,
You
it's
just
probably-
minimized it, you didn't.
Welcome to
Oh,
New Realities.
yeah.
I'm Untitled.
Sorry.
I'm
All right,
back
that's
with
me.
Judith Glazer.
But
And
it's a
probably
really
the most
exciting
important
one.
conversation you
Where did I
can
put it?
have, because her book
You
is
just
called
muted.
Conversational Intelligence,
Sorry.
I
and
don't
it's
wanna
how
mute
great
because we need
leaders
the
build
thing.
trust and get extraordinary
Yeah.
results.
I don't think it came from
Conversation in general, what the world is made of,
Safari again?
exchange of
How we
dialogue.
connect with other human beings.
It's the most
There we go.
Oh, sorry, I was being lazy. Apparently it didn't work very well.
I tried to get it embedded in PowerPoint. I looked for all the videos on how to do that. It just
Well,
didn't work.
Yeah, but Carrie's just got her entire laptop set up differently than mine, so,
There we go.
which is really funny, because it's pretty much the same. Now, is that what you want?
Yeah, you can just bring it
Next
back up.
Okay.
You just don't have to click on it.
So, where's your slideshow thing?
Down at the
That's in a
bottom?
different place too.
I think I must have an older deck.
Yeah,
PowerPoint than
I
you,
think you
maybe.
do.
That's all. Well, we'll just go with this
All right,
one.
but this one I can do now.
Gotta love technology.
Yeah.
Where was I gonna go from there? Sorry. That's okay. Okay, well, let's go with where we are right here. So when we're dealing with as third-party interveners or dealing with conflict, is this often what the people that we're dealing with that's their situation, right? We tend to see people with their backs to each other, not communicating. I mean, Judith talked about how, I know what it was, she was talking about how through conversations we can change that DNA. So we know that the epigenetics means now that we're not faced with just the DNA that we get, that we can start to shift our bodies. We know this through other science as well. And now with conversations, the power of conversations to really change culture, to change a situation, to be positive, to have a positive impact or even a negative impact. And how many of our conflicts that we're helping people to resolve, when they come to us, do they look something like this, where they're not in good communication, where the communication has broken down? And yet there's this part of them often inside that really is wanting to connect, but not really quite knowing how, because their conversation's broken down or they're disconnected somehow, that they've broken away from where they were. And so, this is also true too, that there's this incredible human and animal need to connect. I mean, all you have to do is, if you're on Facebook, if anybody's on Facebook, you know the proliferation of cute cats and cute dog videos and interspecies hugging, and how people are always, I saw one today where this young woman is hugging a baby donkey. It's trying to crawl into her lap, and all these people go, oh, that's so cute. But we react to this need to connect that we see in others, in other animals as well. And this is very much something that is innate in ourselves as well. And so these two things seem to be competing often when we're in conflict. There's this place that wants us to turn our backs or to resist what the other person is saying or doing, or resist in our belief, in our thinking, in our actions. And there's also this other part of us that really does want to connect. And so with this idea of conversational intelligence, it's about how can we look at it as a way to look at co-creating something better. How do we bring parties together to co-create something new? Isn't that what we're often doing in our mediations? We're trying to help the parties to co-create or to create a situation that's different than what brought them into the room or into the situation of conflict. And so picking up on this this desire to connect, and Judith also mentioned, sorry, I'll just wait there for 1 second, she also talked about some of the hormones that are going on, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So yeah, we can go ahead. Thank you. Okay, so this is another slide that I threw in. Of course, I can't resist throwing in another slide after I've sent it off for printing. This was another tip that came up that I wanted to share with you. Again, linking into that need, that desire to be social, that we do want to connect and be social for others. This need to belong is actually more important than our need for safety, and yet it might be that our need for safety is what gets triggered first. When we feel rejected, it does activate that fear. And our fear networks and increases that hormone that she talked about, and that's cortisol is the main one. And how many of you know a little bit about cortisol and what it does in our body? Of course, I know Sue does, a few of you do. So what do we know that cortisol does? What does cortisol do for us?
I don't want to try.
You don't want to try? Why not? I know Sue knows.
I know.
I want to hear other people know. What do you think? What do you think, Derek? What do you know about cortisol?
I think it helps us to chill out. Sorry. Oxy.
You're on the other one.
You're on the other one.
Oxycontin does too. So does oxytocin.
Yes, I know. This is confusing,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah,
you
yeah,
want to come up?
yeah.
I forget you have to come up.
How about if I just project
Yeah.
my voice? Cortisol triggers the
Can't
fight or
tell.
flight. The fight or flight reaction.
Okay, yeah. Cortisol is actually that stress hormone that happens when we are triggered. So it can happen for all kinds of reasons. It can be a stress hormone we get when we work out. Our muscles get flooded with it as well. So sometimes it's productive, but often because we don't run, right? We don't actually physically shake
That's
off
right,
our stress.
Yeah.
And so it tends to build in our system. And then the other one, the flip one, is oxytocin. Not to be confused with Oxycontin. Both happy drugs, one that our body actually produces quite well. And so there's those two hormones are what we are looking at in conversational intelligence too, is how can we look at down-regulating the cortisol and up-regulating the oxytocin, so that the oxytocin is the part that we're bringing people together, we're moving people together, that we're moving towards a productive common solution, if you like. And the cortisol is what gets triggered when we're in that stress, whether it's because we've had a threat to our belonging, our social network, we're being excluded or fear somehow in that way. So when we're looking at this idea of co-creating, and I think this is a really lovely metaphor for mediation as well as it is for the work in the workplace with teams and leaders as well, is moving from the I space to the we space. So when we get trained and we train others in conflict resolution and how to have conversation, often we talk to people about using I language to position and own their emotions, their own state, about taking ownership and rather than pointing the finger and using the you word. However, this is moving in a different direction to say that when we're only in the I space and we're only thinking about I, myself, that can lock us into a place where we're not necessarily looking at things from another person's point of view and co-creating another or better world, if you like, or a better situation, or perhaps a collaborative solution, as we're often looking to help our parties come to as third parties. And so as we co-create, as we move from the I to the we, we're looking again at down-regulating that cortisol and up-regulating the oxytocin. So moving into the we space is really looking at up-regulating that oxytocin hormone, and we'll talk about a bunch of ways we can look at helping others do that, and even in ourselves. When we do stay fixed in that I space, it tend to be more coming from that cortisol type of hormone. And so this is a couple of slides that show a little bit about what happens in our brains when we're in the different states. So these are showing some of the neurons in the cortisol state. I mean, when I look at it, I go, "Oh, it looks kind of pretty, actually." You know, there's all these different things going on. But some of the key points here are around, we can't really see maybe the words quite so brightly there, but that the areas in the brain that get triggered are quite different. So there's an area in the brain called the rostromedial prefrontal cortex that gets triggered when we see that you are not like me. So when we see someone who is different from us, or we see ourselves as other, or we look at others, right? And this is a lot of what gets triggered when we're in that situation where we're seeing other people that are a threat to us, a group of so-called others. That may be the part of the brain that's getting activated, and again, the cortisol, that stress hormone is coming up. We might also see some of the syndromes down there at the bottom right that come around, which are telling, selling, yelling, and or addicted to being right. So being very positional in our mediation language, that would be very positional. I'm right, you're wrong. That kind of binary type of a solution. And cortisol. Now, I think there is some distinction around this, whether it's got a 26-hour shelf life or not, but it does tend to stick around for a lot longer than oxytocin. There's one of the real key learnings I took from a lot of the neuroscience I've been reading, including this, is that it's actually harder to activate the oxytocin than it is to activate the cortisol. Cortisol is very easy. It's very quick. It's very fast, and it can sit in our system quite a bit. So when that part is activated, the part that can link into sharing can get reduced, that part of the brain. And so if we think about the difference between trust and distrust, this is going to be more about leveraging the distrust part of the neural system. This is another example. Again, we can sort of see a little bit different happening here in the neurons in the brain when we're looking at more of the other side, where it's more into the sharing side of the brain, where we see more oxytocin being elevated, and the use of our mirror neurons. I know we've talked about mirror neurons here a couple of times before in different areas, that notion that when we are in connection with others and we are moving towards that we space, we start to activate the neurons in each other's brains, which is one thing Judith was talking about in that little video, is we can literally start to rewire not just our own brains, but others' brains through conversation. Through the use of the mirror neurons and through the connections that happen with the leveraging the oxytocin both in ourselves and in others. And so this takes place more in a different part of the brain, which we'll come to in just a moment. The key part I thought was really interesting is, as I said earlier, that it takes 0.07 seconds for that like me, not like me part of the brain to get triggered, to get activated. And within that 0.07 seconds, our brains are making a call. Are you like me, or are you not like me, right? So we're making that very, very quickly, and it takes a little bit longer, the 0.1 second, to move into that sharing aspect of things. So again, there's that difference between what we have to work a little bit harder, perhaps, to move into that higher level of getting more of the oxytocin and moving from the I to the we space.
Do we know what's going on in the picture?
I think it's more about the neurons are actually, they're wiring together a little bit better, whereas in the previous slide they looked a lot more disparate, even though I thought they both looked kind of pretty because of the colors, but there's more going on in that respect. But what do you, because you know a little bit more about neuroscience.
Yeah, that's an artist rendition. You can see the middle is seen where
Yeah.
it's exactly duplicate left
Yeah.
and right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Wondering
Yeah.
if there was something more to it.
Yeah.
Great.
So if we take a look at the next slide around this idea of there being 5 parts of the brain that we can look at accessing, and that there's wisdom in all 5 of these. So when we tend to talk about the amygdala, the one, the reptilian brain, if you like, down as the one that it kind of gets a lot of bad press. Because it's the part of our oldest part of our brain that is most primitive, and is the part that moves really into that protect mode. The part that gets us that instinctual reaction, and it'll be different for each of us. Is your instinctual reaction under stress, under threat, to the classic 3Fs, right? Is it to flee? Is it to fight? Is it to freeze? Somebody was telling me a story the other day about a man, a fellow who, it was in the academic world too, and a peer yelled at him and took him to task so virulently that he fainted on the spot. It's a senior academic. He just fainted on the spot because you could tell, his whole system was so primed and had an old pattern that when this person verbally and not physically but verbally attacked his very being and his identity, he just literally dropped. He passed out. Right. So that's incredible. That's a very, very strong reaction. Anyway, I just thought that was a very interesting and very visceral explanation of somebody who's been hijacked by their amygdala in that moment, quite probably by something very old to him in terms of what got triggered that brought that reaction about. And then if we look at the neocortex, that is the place in our brain where we tend to process more language. And some of our old scripts are in there, our working memory, and the things that run in our brain. So if we have that kind of self-talk that happens, or the meanings that we've made in our lives about things probably from childhood, like stories that we tell ourselves about success, or about conflict itself, or about money, those old things that tend to live there, including our working memory. And then our limbic brain, that emotional part, that's the part that does give us that social, where do I fit in? Am I connected or am I not connected? And then what she's calling and others are calling the heart brain, also a basic place that connects all of our systems together. And are we in sync or are we not in sync internally? Are we in sync together with other people or are we not in sync? So where that reverberates in there as well. And then the highest part of our brain, the one that we can really make the most change with, especially when it comes to conversations, is up in the prefrontal cortex, and really quite literally at the front of our head. When I've been using this work with some of my coaching clients, it's been very helpful for them to understand where they're reacting from, and even to visualize where they are in their brain in terms of what's going on for them. So it was almost like just touching the front of the head to say, okay, I got to come back here. If I'm back here, let me just come and do that kind of somatic, it's almost like a somatic touching of the head to bring the attention here, just to kind of come in front. And this is the place where, of course, we do a lot of our decision making, our executive function, our planning for our lives, our future vision, our visioning happens here, and also empathy, how we're able to see the world from another person's point of view. Can be very much activated through the prefrontal cortex. So there's a bunch of different places where we can look to activate and use the intelligence, if you like, of our 5 brains. I mean, the reptilian brain, that part that does respond to threat, it's still useful, right? It helps us to identify if something's just not right here. And there's a nerve called the vagal nerve that's also connected to all this, that then we start to talk about the sense of having a gut feeling about something. Well, that nerve is actually connected to all of this. And so when we get those gut feelings, it's reacting very much to all this whole system. So that reptilian brain, that amygdala, is telling us something. The question is it telling us something productive? Or is it based on old patterns and reactivity? And I'm sure Sue's going to take us out more into that. How do we be resilient in the face of some of that reactivity, those old patterns, when we get a chance to do some of the work with her. Okay, let's find out what's going on next. Okay, so this is a really interesting concept, I thought, that this idea that words create worlds. So when Judith talks about the power of conversations, if we distill it down into individual words, what is the power of an individual word to create a world? And what kind of world will it create? And this is where it starts to all link back into what's happening. Is it a word? Are they words that are likely going to trigger the amygdala in another person? Are they words that are likely to cause a rise in cortisol in the workplace or in the system? Or are they words that are positive and are designed to be more exploratory, or creative, or generative, or co-creative, or connecting us and moving into collaboration? So it can actually literally activate our neurochemistry in that way. So here's an example of the power of one word. And I don't just mean the words that form the word threats, but just if we think about words that can get utilized either before a mediation that we might be intervening in, or even during the mediation itself. What are all the different words that are being used? And you know, we can think of that word threats as an acronym for what is it in those words? What is the tone? Is it humiliating? Is there some rejection involved in in those words, or exclusion? Anger, territoriality, and status, by virtue meaning asserting status over, or power over even, that will trigger that amygdala side of the brain. And so that, again, raises the cortisol, which then starts to downregulate raise the cortisol and downregulate the oxytocin. So as the feel bad hormone is activated, the feel good hormone is deactivated, and can move someone further away from their willingness to resolve conflict or to come towards and connect with the other party. And again, 0.07 seconds. If we move to the other side and wanted to look at other words that would then bring us into more synchronicity, there's another acronym that can help us with that. I think that's on our next one here. And this is linked to some of the vital instincts that we all are searching for. And again, another acronym that's helpful, I think, in terms of we all tend to look for fairness. And we know this from our mediation training and our mediations that we do, is we're helping parties to try and find what is a fair resolution to them. Most people come into conflict and they do want a fair, they want something fair. The question is, what does that mean, right? What does fair mean? Is it the same? Is it a shared meaning, or is it a different meaning of fair? And this is something Judith talks about. She calls it double clicking. Like, you know, when you have your mouse and you double click to find, go looking on the internet, and you double click to drill deeper into a website. So it's that kind of idea. And we know this from asking beneath the surface, not taking it at face value. Using double clicking as an idea, as a way of looking below what the superficial, above the waterline, if you like, statement or position someone's saying. What is underlying that? What is the real meaning there? And that we're also looking for some kind of ownership. We want to have an ownership over our own solution, ownership over the situation. And of course, reciprocity, we're always looking for that. So these are some of the things that we're looking for that can indicate whether we're opening up or we're closing down in our conversations with each other. So again, two different ways of looking at the threats as activating the cortisol, moving us away from each other, closing down, or what can we do to bring people into conversation in a more we-focused way. And so the word focus, it can be an acronym that can help look those things that people are looking for. All right, so this was starting to get, so that's just leaving aside what can happen with us in our conversations. Again, are we raising our cortisol, or are we raising our oxytocin? Which side of it are we focused on? Either way, when we're talking about, again, the idea that words create worlds, well, we can often have it happen that what somebody intends has their intention, and what can be quite different from the impact. Of course, we know this from that's what gets people to our door, right? Often is often what happens. And so one way we can lead people to looking at, okay, come back into that place. What is it? What is it in the center? What is it your true intention is, and how is that different from the impact? Now, when Judith talks about it, she talks about the reason why there's a big star in there. She calls it the third eye, and which I always associate with chakras and that, you know, touching into the third eye in looking inward in that kind of sense. And there is some connection to it, although that's not exactly what she means. She's meaning to look inward to, is your intention matching your impact, and how is that different? So identifying that gap between intention and impact, and looking towards bringing that into alignment for greater understanding and greater understanding both ways. So in doing that double clicking, again, ensuring whether one's intention is being received in the way that we expect it will be. And so one of the other things that she talks about as a way of looking at that, to ensure that, is how what she calls the ladder of conclusions. Now, this may sound somewhat familiar for many of you who've read Chris or worked with Chris Argyris's work. on the ladder of inference. How many of you are familiar with ladder of inference? Chris Archer's work. Okay, not so many. So this, what she's talking about here is what we tend to make meaning, all of us, from a situation. We tend to go up the ladder. Our bioreactions start. That we know what's happening in our body. Are we moving into flight? Or are we moving into happiness? Are we getting reactive from the cortisol, or are we calming down from the oxytocin? And when we're triggered, we tend to go up the ladder and make those snap decisions, or those snap conclusions about the meaning that someone else is that is imparting. So if we think about the previous slide with intention impact, if Derek were to say something to me, the impact that I perceive is the meaning that I make. So what the meaning that I make is mine. It might not be the meaning that Derek intended for me to receive, but that's the meaning that I take, because I may have gone up that ladder and made that meaning based on interpretations and assumptions, based on old patterns, based on old tapes, old scripts that are in my cortex, or old reactions that are embedded into my amygdala. And so I go right through the thoughts and beliefs that form part of that meaning screen, right to those conclusions. When we recognize that this is going on, either for ourselves or for others, we can help come back down the ladder and go back down and uncover what is really going on. What could it be that there's another interpretation here? Could it be that there's a gap between what Derek intended and what the impact of my hearing it and processing it and attaching a meaning and making up a story? Because we're making up stories all the time, so that's that making stuff up part. So in this sense, the conflict itself lives inside that story, that meaning that I've just made, connected to everything that I've brought with me, including what Derek has said and how Derek has said it. So what's that intention? How is that connected? Making sense? Okay.
Yeah, every time you're talking about this, it's making me think of a particular example of a phrase that triggers, and I think it triggers quite a lot of people. I don't think it's just me.
What's that?
The one, we have to talk.
Oh.
Yeah.
The intention might be awesome. I'm fine, yeah. But the intention might be, let's have a good conversation. Right. We need to, chat about it. I don't know anybody who doesn't get that sick feeling.
Yeah.
Just know we have to talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my kids freak and start going, is it bad?
It depends on the tone.
It doesn't depend on the tone. I recognize that it should depend on the tone, but I think that some of these things have such a strong connection that even when you're trying to convey something else.
Yeah, and I'm curious too whether how often that gets embedded in the family system. Like if you're talking with, that pattern shows up. I know in my relationship it's the same thing. It doesn't matter how curious I phrase it, the impact will be different than what I intend it to be, and then we've got to unpack that part. Mm-hmm. So it's a challenge, right? Again, that's a great example because it's a challenge to show how quickly we go to that cortisol side of things, and how much more challenging it can be to create the space for the oxytocin to be there. I don't think I have it on a slide, but there's some parts of it that talks about that there's a physical space. There's also environmental too. So there's a physical space, and I think it's might be 15 feet. I think it might be less. It's about 10 feet. That if we're further away than 10 feet, we have a hard time making that connection. But when we're within 10 feet of another person, we start to actually feed into another system, which could be more energetic. But that our intentions may be able to become a bit clearer when we're in closer proximity. So there's actually a physical space piece that can happen there too, which I think is really interesting when we're talking about third-party interventions, because what does the room look like? Where are the parties? How close are they sitting? I mean, we're often concerned about them sitting too close, but are they close enough to be able to access each other's worlds, to be able to have more of that connection happening as well? So that's a great example. Thank you. So this is another way of looking at things too. I find this really helpful. My clients are really finding this one helpful too, is this idea of this conversational dashboard, how we move from the I to the we, from the left to the right. And that when we're in low trust, and that everything has to do with trust. How much are we trusting? And when we're in low trust, typically that's our amygdala maybe firing, our old patterns are, and we're in the we side. We're high on that protect side of things. So our reptilian brain has a very good job that it wants to do, which is to protect us from threats. Real, perceived, and otherwise. Our job is to determine whether it's real, or is it perceived, or is it some otherwise in there as well. And how do we move to higher trust? So this is an example of how we can start to move both ourselves in terms of recognizing where we are, but also what we can recognize where other people are, where we are in our own conflict. As mediators, this can be perhaps helpful in terms of perceiving where are they on this arc in this conversational dashboard. Are they in the skeptic phase? Are they more in the wait and see? Maybe they're ready to move over into more of that experimenter place, excuse me. So to me, it also matches our sequence when we're looking at our mediation sequence, as we're looking to move parties through positions that are far apart and start to move them through a process that ultimately will lead them to the experimenter. And if we go into try to take them to that experimenter place, they may still be way over in the distrust and the skeptic side of things. And so then what happens to the agreements if we've moved them, if they've moved or we've helped them move too fast to that experimenter phase, if they haven't gone through that, or they haven't gone at least to the trust part, to gain more trust between them so that experimenter phase is real and meaningful, and then into that co-creation and high trust place. Thoughts or questions on that? Okay.
Are you going to show us how to move from protect to partner?
We'll talk about some of it. I mean, again, I'm still learning a lot of this, but we know a lot of stuff that we use in our mediation. So what would you recommend for move from protect to partner in your own experience?
Okay, now he is behind the mic, so we'll have to come up. I'm on the side, so I'm okay. So,
or I can repeat.
Or repeat.
So, what would you?
I apologize. You can stand just beside
No,
Darcy,
no,
because it'll be caught there. You don't have to
I
stand in
made a
front.
mistake of opening my mouth. No.
No mistakes.
Well, I mean, I'm not a mediator, but when I'm coaching them, I work off with a concept called positive loop. So that's when you listen to the other person, and you get typically you'll get some negative statements, you get some positive statements, and so you repeat back positive stuff, which presumably raises the oxytocin. I was just thinking about that as you were speaking.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, if you repeat the negative stuff, it brings up the cortisol and the conversation spirals.
Yeah, great.
So that's one technique that I know.
Thank you. And absolutely, and we're actually moving, thank you for that. It's a little, it's precocious, because that's one of the things that we're just about to talk about, so thank you. But that's great, because it does feed into that loop. And of course, what's one of the foundational skills every mediator learns on the first day of training?
Reframing.
That one too. Before you reframe, you got to do something else, right? Which is?
No, open questions.
Well, open questions.
Acknowledge.
And listening. Listening is a
yes.
big one, right? That's exactly right.
Broad,
So they're all part of this, and thank you for identifying it, because I think when we start to identify, oh, this is them going into cortisol, oh, this is them now coming into oxytocin. It's a lovely way to watch the arc of the people that we're working with and to be able to attach something to it. And I actually find my clients are really responding to it. It's kind of like the day I took Myers-Briggs into a workplace and people went, oh, so it's not their fault. You're not evil, right? No, seriously,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
we've had this experience. So it helps people put the stuff outside of themselves. It helps them put the stuff outside of the other person and into something they can look at like a chalkboard and say, oh, okay, now we got something to work with, right?
So what he's doing is what others would call appreciative inquiry.
Absolutely.
And so that stabilizes their identity, and when a person is confident, it adjusts their status and your
So we're reifying their existence, reframing.
And when you feel safe, you feel confidence and more courageous. So they're more able to listen because they're confident they'll be okay.
So Sue I'm just rephrasing. Sue was saying that using those techniques is helping to bring that other person into a place of feeling safe and acknowledged and comfortable. Absolutely. And that's why it works. That's why we can watch the temperature in the room go from here to, whew, oh, wow. You know, there's an openness, there's a willingness to move people forward. I find this work helpful to understand why that's working. So a lot of this to me is supporting the work that we're doing as conflict resolvers and saying this is why it works when it works. And also pointing out, okay, this is why when it doesn't work, this may be what's going on for that person. So we have another clue, another tool for identifying or diagnosing or analyzing what could we do next or what could happen next. Mark.
I will move out so you can hear me. One of your earlier slides talked about how the cortisol takes 26 hours, has a 26-hour lifetime. So I pause over that, and I wonder how, as you describe the fight or flight and calming the room by shifting that, it seems to me surprising and counter to the 26-hour life that you'd be able to shift the temperature, if you will, that quickly.
It's a great question. From my experience, and I would say taking this knowledge into in future iterations, is really being attuned to how intense is that cortisol reaction. So I'll give you an example. I had an experience recently where I had a very disappointing news about a contract that I was putting myself out for and did not get. And I know all the reasons why intellectually, you know, the prefrontal cortex, I can identify it, and still just kept firing and firing, right? So some of this old stuff. So I did what I actually learned from my work with horses, is I walked it out. I went for a run 2 days in a row. I had to let some of it out of my body physically. And so I think part of it is identifying, where are they? Do they need to take a break? How long a break do they need to take? So if it's that 26 hour, maybe it is a good idea to take a break for a day. If the cortisol reactions are so intense, then that can be an idea to take a longer break. It may indicate, this is the thing I'm wondering about, is I'm wondering if we need to be more vigilant to where are the parties in the process and are they ready to make this deal? Are they out of it? Are they out of it enough that they can access their prefrontal cortex to make a good decision, right? Because the higher our cortisol, the higher our intensity of our reactivity, the lower our ability to make a good decision.
So
you want to come up?
You need to come up, so if you could.
Okay. It would seem to me, Carrie, that you had a grieving process that you had to go through, and so there are events that we assign meaning to.
Yeah,
so something.
absolutely.
So there's the sense of loss and sorrow, but also that you won't be able to get past those 5 steps. You've heard of Kubler-Ross with the
grieving
phases of
steps, yeah.
grieving, but also there's the meaning we attribute to it, and so if something feels so unjust and so unfair, you will definitely be stuck either in the denial or the anger phase, and you will want revenge, right? You will want, because that is what's fair, is to get back at them.
Some people would, yeah.
Right, and so
Yeah.
that I'm referring to the
Yeah.
reptilian brain,
Yeah.
right, would want, and so that's a status thing, and you are very unsafe when someone's disrespecting what you feel is civil treatment. And so those things, until you can address, there's meaning, right, and belief around what's right, and then there's the
Exactly.
how we respond.
Right, so that the F forces, that fair, can get activated. Now, that's not what was happening for me, but what was great was I went back to this work, and I went right up and down the ladder several times to, what story am I making? What's the old story? What's the old pattern? What's it triggering in me that has nothing to do with the players in this thing, but is triggering old crap? What's that story? And am I not done with it yet? You know, and so, so that's what was helpful for me. But to come back to Mark, to your question, I think, I think the more oxytocin I was able to generate, the easier it was to let that out of my system. But it was also, I needed the physical aspect. And when I mention horses, it's because animals need to, when they're stressed, they need to shake it off or walk it out. I had a horse that reared up on me. I had a plastic bag the other day, and it was just like, you can't just bring them back down and hold them there. She needs to walk it out. She needs to walk off the stress to let it go physically. So that's why I mentioned that. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, actually, sorry, yes. One of the lenses I here, as Carrie, you know, hear these discussions through is not as a mediator, but as a negotiator or an advisor
Yeah.
in the context of negotiation. And the observation that you made of sometimes you need to maybe wait a day, that's very much true in that world as well. I mean, sometimes I have clients who are beating up on me. No, we gotta push this forward. And part of my response, although I wasn't identifying the cortisol function of it, but part of my response is sometimes, nah, these things take their pace, and sometimes you just have to wait.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
having
yeah.
an explanation as to what to hook that on.
Yeah, that's great, and it's a good example. And it's important to, thank you for that, to remember that works in negotiation as well. Because I mean, we're helping and as mediator, we're helping our parties to negotiate, right? And sometimes we're doing that ourselves as well, is to recognizing where is the other party in the cycle, and what can we do to help upregulate. And so there's lots of things we can do to help upregulate the cortisol, right? Is how can we move closer together? How can we move closer together physically, metaphorically? How can we stimulate the sharing? And actually one of the things, I don't think I have a slide for it, but is about the notion that sharing, literally sharing, being the first to model sharing of some kind. And Sharon, I know you know, but food at a mediation is a great way to sort of stimulate that as mediators. What do we bring, what do we set up in the environment to stimulate those sharing? The more we stimulate that sharing, the more likely we are to be able to help the other party come through that cortisol space as well. I just want to remember where I was at before I get there. Okay, right. So this is just a quick one around how we can make mistakes and in our conversations, and one of them is through telling and selling and yelling, right? And this is by the way, this is a prelude to the May 10th seminar on the zombies, right?
Yeah.
So they're pretty much in that direction only, and addicted to being right too. And this isn't just somebody who's constantly being addicted to right, but how many of us get addicted to being right sometimes in certain circumstances, right? And when we're in that space, is it our cortisol? Are we in our fear base? Often we are when we're addicted to being right, because we're afraid of something else happening, right? There's some fear that actually the person who's addicted to being right is actually activating some fear in themselves. There's some fear in themselves that's being activated to manifest that addicted to being right, which of course is cyclical, because what does it do for the other person? Often activates some kind of trigger in them, right? So this cortisol, you can often feel it when the parties walk into the room, or you walk into certain meetings and certain workplaces. Oh, get me out of here, right? That's often what might be happening there too. So that's just an example of what it can look like when we're in that space. So what do we do instead? Well, we want to move from I to we. We want to move from distrust. And distrust, when we go back to that 5 brain model, if we think about the brain, distrust, where do you think distrust lives in the brain? Big red space. Yeah, actually that's actually right. It does. It lives in that big, red, glaring red stop sign space in the back of the brain, mostly. And in the limbic too, yeah.
It's just cerebellum.
Pardon me?
I think there's a picture of your
well,
son,
right in here.
but the amygdala.
Right
Yeah,
here, right?
There you go.
Yeah. And then, but trust, on the other hand, lives in the front, in the prefrontal cortex, and through the limbic and into the prefrontal cortex. So it's actually like I think of it like where you can think about where you are in your brain, literally, where you activated, and can you bring your attention to what it is your intention is in that moment, and move into helping to build trust. And this goes back to your point earlier around listening. That if we listen to connect, we are moving towards that trust space. So it's not just listening to hear the words that you want to hear, but listening to connect, listening to understand all the things that we know of as we have come into our field, and really promoting that connection with the other person. So that's the symbol of the waves in between the two people is really, that's one of the foundations for building trust. And of course, again, a key component skill to all the work that we all do. So we have listening to connect. There's also ways of looking at conversation itself in 3 different levels. Again, going from the cortisol up to the oxytocin, and as we move through the levels from level 1, 2, and 3, we move from more of a cortisol type of a conversation, cortisol potentially inducing conversation, into an oxytocin type of a conversation. So the 3 levels, I'm going to go through them in a little bit more detail, are transactional in level 1, positional in level 2, and then level 3 transformative. So this was very evocative to me of a lot of the things that we do in mediation, and even in terms of the types of mediation that we do, the styles of mediation that we do. Are we in interest-based, or are we in what's that? I'm missing. I'm lost.
Evaluative?
Thank you. Evaluative. Are we evaluative? Are we interest-based? Or are we transformative? I mean, it's really literally the word, right? So we can think about it that way. And even when we think about negotiation, I invite you to think about it too through that lens. So here's a bit more about those 3 different levels, and I'm going to go into a bit more again. So symbolic of level 1, that transactional, is really about exchanging information. The telling and the asking, confirming what you know. And so there's nothing that says any of these levels is good or bad, but it's where we are using them and what we're using them for. In level 2, it's more positional, about exchanging power, and advocating and inquiring. So we're figuring things out. Perhaps we're sharing what each other's positions are, exchanging that, and defending what you know. And then in level 3, more transformational, about exchanging energy and about sharing and being more in the sharing and discovery aspect of things. This is where listening to connect really lives, is in the level 3. Discovering what you don't know, asking questions that you don't know the answer to. Not presupposing, not directing, while seeming to be open, right? But really literally listening to connect, being that true curiosity, really opening up that hat to be really curious, and that's moving into that, more into that space of the possibility of co-creating a new situation, however how you want to take it. I mean, Judith's vision is a really big vision. It's about co-creating the world in a better world, as well as better worlds in organizations and better worlds in teams. So she's got it on all those different levels. Discovering what you don't know. Sorry.
Well, that seems to be a little bit counterintuitive. That I mean, because positional to me sounds like it should be lower than transactional, because when you're defending what you know, you're really not listening. Whereas at least if you're telling and asking, maybe you are listening. So could you say a bit more about that?
Okay. My understanding is how that you are listening, but your listening level is changing too, in terms of what you're listening for. So the listening to connect is really more in the level 3, is really looking to connect on that level and moving into that co-creation space. And in level 2, you're listening for the other person's position and how distinct it is from yours. So there's still a positional aspect of it, so that you can defend your side, your part of it. So the inquiry is about what, and this is classic negotiation, right? This is classic negotiation in exchanging those positions. When we get into more of the interest-based negotiation, where we're looking to dive below the surface and really create something new, we might be in a different type of listening, different type of questioning, different type of result that we're looking for. In the transactional, it's more of that telling and asking. So we might be listening so that we can know what we're going to say next, right? The classic, I'm listening so that I'm going to make up my mind what I'm going to say when you finish talking. Maybe more in that end of things. So we might be expanding how we're listening, as well as the whole nature of the conversation.
So I'm wondering if another word you might use then for level 2 is explore what you know. So it's like, it's more open than confirm, but not as open as discover what you don't know.
Oh, in level 3, you mean?
Well, obviously level 3 is the highest, but I'm just okay. I'm just wondering if at level 2 you might also be exploring what you know, or what the other. So it's not just about
I think, can I
Yeah,
say
yeah.
what I'm getting from
Sure.
it? And I don't know if it's right, but it might be a way
I
to
don't know
check
if there is
it.
a right or a wrong.
No,
but
no,
it's
but
just
I
how
don't
it's
know if
landing.
I don't know if it's what Judith
Yeah,
means.
okay.
We're
in
modeling
terms of the
transformational,
model.
by the way.
Yeah. But in terms of, because to me, I maybe I'm just going by the visual, but the tell ask to me is we're just communicating back and forth on a very, very surface
Right.
level
Data.
Yeah.
information, data
Potentially, yeah.
exchange,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
That's what I think of with exchange information. You're confirming what you know in as much as you're telling somebody what you know, and you're having that minimal actual engagement.
Mhm.
I think of the positional one as what I would actually call listening to rebut.
Yeah, exactly.
You're listening for, so you actually are paying attention to what the other person is saying, but you're listening for what's wrong with it, so you can argue with it, as opposed to what do I agree with in it. And I see that next step as moving into, it gets transformational as soon as you become open to what do I don't know, rather than just what's wrong with what you know.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's.
Well, that's kind of where I was seeing it as in the overlay with mediation.
Yeah.
Even in terms of the process, you know, like where do we start our mediation processes? Pretty much here, right? We typically start there. We move reasonably quickly into here. Many of us, some of us, just don't really actually go farther than this. You know, the evaluative, we tend to, this is my view, we would tend to stay here in evaluative, like in the classic insurance or ICBC. Rarely, it's not going to get over here, right? It tends to stay here. And so again, comes what is it we're create? Are we looking to create something new? Are we looking to co-create something? Are we looking to improve relationships? Then we might want to spend more time over here, and you know, so it's not a static. We only do level 3 or we only do level 2, right? Often there's a fluidity in our conversations. It's if we want to be co-creating something, we want to move more towards more and spend more time in that level 3, because when we create that openness, and again, this is built with trust, so that we can get there by building the trust, and the listening skills and some of our ways of asking questions can also feed into that as well. So this is again more information about these three. And I've cut and pasted here because it's quite a lot there, but I thought these things were the most relevant. So just as a way of thinking about it in a bit more detail.
Carrie,
Yeah.
I this might be really out of step, but I just received an email that may have been sent a little bit
Okay.
before with a question that I believe I meant to actually ask you. Does chocolate help with oxytocin?
I think that's a great question, because I think it does for me. Hint.
I suspect it may have. There's a little bit of a delay, and it may have come
Yeah.
up when you were talking food. But
Well, I think it's a great one, because I mean we're talking about our conversation a little bit ago where we were talking about, and I think it was in response to your idea, Mark. Is if cortisol has been produced in the room, how do we add more oxytocin? Chocolate is a great strategy. I'm not going to promote. We're going to share some OxyContin. But, you know, the strategy for trying to shift the physiology, and I think when you shift the physiology, you start to shift other things too. So this is just some other ways of thinking about it. And again, you know, if we think about what we talked about earlier, positional, we tend to think about more of that win at all cost and more in the mutual success. So when we get to there in a negotiation, for example, or a mediation, is all of a sudden there's an interest in the other party. There's an interest in what will work for you, as opposed to this is what will work for me. Right? So it's making a shift into more into that we side of things. And again, so there's our listening, difference in the listening. We're looking at whether we're going to accept or reject those positions. We might be listening more from a protective stance in the front end. And if you think about the cycle in your mediations, isn't that what people are at when it's at the very beginning of our processes? Where are they at? They're in protective mode at that moment, right? It's like I come into this room. This is what I'm here to protect, whatever that might be. moving from my success to mutual success, from low trust to high trust. So you can see the progression as we move over further to the right in our level conversations. And again, it's not to say that level 1 is never useful, but we might use it in particular places in our conversations and for particular things. Where do you want to go for dinner? What's a good place to go for dinner? Well, that seems to be quite an easy one that we might actually only be a level 1 conversation at that point. Sue, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
This
Our
is
technology.
Yeah. Does anybody know what a taxonomy is?
Yeah.
It's so basically to me this is a way of observing the process that has happened through many events that had positive outcomes, and she was able to draw a line and label the different stages. The challenge though is actually bringing it to moving it to the right, and trust has to be earned, right? It's not something we can do. It's the other person who graces us with their trust. And so if someone, for example, has, let's say, arranged a meeting that I really had an important thing to say, I didn't want it to go forward, they did it when I was out of town.
Yeah.
Specifically to move it forward, the decision was made and there was nothing I could do about it. So it's hard for me to want to be open when I knew the intent was to go around me. And it's hard to want to hear their perspective when I've been
Sure, because you're in
injured.
threat at that point. You're in the threat protect.
Exactly.
place at that
And
point.
so what I'm
Yeah.
saying is it's not something that we can do necessarily, it's the other party. So you can listen,
know.
you can listen and you can be open, but if the other person is guarded, what I'm saying there are two halves to this.
Absolutely.
And it's that's the tough part, and
Yeah.
I'd like to hear what she has
Yeah.
to say about how to actually implement that, where the rubber meets the road is how do you do
Right.
this, not just these are the
Oh
ways.
yeah. This is the beginning of looking at the different levels that we can think about in terms of our conversations. There's like fields of beyond under here too. But I disagree with you on the trust thing. I mean, if you look at John Gottman's research, he says there's lots that you can do to build trust.
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
what it's the things that your actions that you're doing that you're putting in the bank, so the other person you can build trust in that relationship. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
A way towards. Does
Yeah.
anybody know the John Gottman, the Love Lab? Oh, that is so important.
He's done a
for
lot
this.
he's a marital therapist. He's done tons of work. He's done a lot of work in terms of trust and how you build trust, what takes it away. Of course, we lose it like that. It takes a lot longer to build it up. And the same is true in the workplace and all kinds of really cool stuff. I think what you can do, this is a two-dimensional. It's a taxonomy in the same way that our mediation. We start with the opening story. We go through the 5 steps or the 4 steps or the 6 steps or the circle process or whatever it is you've learned as a starting place. This is one way, a lens of looking at how we can move towards the co-creation aspect of things as a way of looking at how we might think about our conversations. There's a lot, of course, we can do in terms of looking at changing our language, saying more of this, saying less of this, using more of this type of language and less of that kind of language in our conversations. Like the phrase that you brought up earlier, right? We have to talk. So perhaps there's another phrase, and we'll have to come up with one that'll work better for you. But you're looking at changing language around that, like saying things like "you should have done X." How often does that trigger someone's amygdala? And so how can you rephrase that? What are some ideas around that? So. I brought this because I wanted to bring this to you and think about what are some of the applications in mediation, where you can see this applying in your practice, and also because I'm still going on with this stuff, so I'll have more to come back and report another time and work forward on that. So I welcome any feedback, ideas, thoughts more than we've had already, reactions.
Well, the classic would be to
You have to come up here.
Like a really easy one would be focus on what's and how's questions instead of why's. or the shooting,
Yeah.
the shooting on people.
Yeah.
That's a-
Thank you.
Carrie,
Yeah, thank you.
are you familiar
Thank you.
with Amy Cuddy's
Yes.
TED
Oh,
Talk?
yeah.
about- So the
Which
pose,
part are you resonating with there?
the
today?
pose
Uh-huh.
that you reduce cortisol by 20% in 2 minutes.
Right. Yeah, it's a great one. Do you want to
So
say
we
more about
could,
it?
for example, start mediations by everyone getting in the pose for 2 minutes.
Well,
That's
you're
great.
gonna have to
You have
come
to,
up
you have to
here
come up
where
and
we can see.
demonstrate it.
Put your feet up on the desk.
Oh, no, I do
Yeah,
it a
it's
lot.
the-
You just
yeah,
go, or you can do the desk
Yeah.
one, yes.
Or the Wonder Woman pose.
Or the one,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and she says to hold it for 20 seconds, that shifts.
Oh, I thought it was 2 minutes.
Is it 2 minutes? I thought it was more like 20 seconds shorter than that. but just-
They both work, it would
Yeah.
just be a different degree
Sure.
of serum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that'd be fun to do.
Mhm. Sounds good.
Anything that you've used in your mediations that reflects some of this stuff that you want to share, ideas for how to bring this forward? How you might utilize it. Well, your application is coaching, but if you want, do you want to bring that up?
Yeah, and I've done actually a number of
Oh, okay.
workplace
Didn't know
mediations
that.
for sure, yeah. And so, one is to make sure that people all agree to hold close, all behavior makes sense.
Mm.
And it might seem irrational from the outside, but once you get to know what's going on for that person, what their beliefs or assumptions, or do they all know cheap BFE? What their concerns,
yeah.
hopes, expectations, perceptions, purpose, beliefs, fears, values, whatever's, once they understand what's going on for the other party, and maybe some information they didn't have, or information, data that was wrong, or that in hindsight that would explain why they would do or say the things they did that to them at the time seemed like a fair thing to do. Because the formula that they had used to decide if it was a good idea or not did not have the other person's feelings in their decision matrix,
Right.
for example. So all behavior makes sense when you see what they
So
use.
that's a great example. Another thing that I didn't talk about today, but is rules of engagement. So an agreement on and we do, most of us do this at the start of a mediation. We come up with some, how people are going to behave in the room, and we might call them different things. Interestingly, though, in mediation, how many of you share those at the outset? Your processes or the rules for,
Share
so
them
they're
as opposed to
yours.
get them to
That's
come
my
up
question.
with
Hang on. That's what my question would be. I wanted to ask that. How many of you share them? And then how many of you actually ask them what they want to have see as the agreement for how to proceed?
I co-create them.
You co-create them with them, yeah? Yeah, yeah. So there's something that suggests that if the people in the room, whether it's a meeting or mediation or whatever, are having some input into those rules, or what I'm just going to call them rules of engagement for now, have some input into that, it already goes towards the oxytocin. It already goes towards the connection. So that was something I thought was really resonant for me in terms of mediation, is finding some way to get their input. Even though they're often terrified at the front end, and that's what I often find is they're often, this is such a new process for them. They can be so intimidated by it, and that's my job to bring them down from that place into the place where they are more comfortable, so they can access their ideas in terms of what they want to see in the room, what kinds of agreements they want to see. So that's another tip. I should put that on the slide for that one. Thank you.
What you make me think of, Carrie, with that is just the importance of pre-mediation meetings to take them into account in terms of some of this. I haven't thought of them in those terms, but it's obviously a great place when people are particularly nervous or stressed to be able to have that one-on-one conversation and potentially be looking at, I just haven't thought of it in the terms of, am I assisting with oxytocin, or am I actually trying to at least reduce cortisol production in terms of these things? But yes, it's with, what are we going to do? What are the things in those kind of contexts? It's often, what are you concerned about coming up, and how will we make that work for you, as opposed to what rules of engagement do we need? But it's very similar.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've often done. I usually do the pre-mediations, and I often think of it as helping the parties to prepare. But I hadn't really thought about it as you're right, as a place where they can down-regulate their anxieties and fears about facing the other person in the room and or about the process, and actually create some level of comfort, not too much, but enough. that they're able to be more open and access some of those things. Yeah, it's great.
So there's two things. One is they are heard.
Yes,
They feel heard.
absolutely.
Another thing is the autonomy and agency. They've
Those-
contributed to
the
it.
forces are all activated.
And when those are activated, they feel more courageous.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
feel
absolutely.
stronger and more confident because they're contributing.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you want to come up? We'd like to hear you.
You need to at least come to the side to be heard, or Carrie will have to repeat.
Well, just thinking about in pre-mediation, some of the other things you can do there is find out what had been their past patterns of conversations.
Yeah.
So you can learn that separately without having to do
That's
that in
right.
the same room. Or to ask the parties directly if they can try to articulate what are some of their triggers. And then you can then, as a mediator, be watching for that, right?
Yeah.
As you see that mediation unfolding.
That's a great idea too. You can actually use the ladder if you. So how are you making those conclusions? What's it being based on? And they can actually do some of that in pre-mediation. Do that private caucus work ahead of time. It's great. And I like the courage and things that can bring out as well. Yeah,
I was
Janine.
thinking about something that Mark was saying about sleeping on things overnight and then coming back the next day, and how effective that can be in all sorts of areas. And yet often in mediations, they're scheduled for one day. It'd be interesting to see the statistics on 2-day mediations, if they're more successful.
Yeah.
Would it be better to start mediations at noon and then finish them in the morning the next day, so
Right.
that people do have a chance to digest
Yeah.
and lower their cortisol levels?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I'm recognizing too that we often feel pressure from the client's agenda to get things resolved, and or their time away from their work and their busy lives, et cetera, and our own construction of our own business and lives that can often get in the way. I like what you're suggesting, is we might even move to half-day mediations as a result, see how that works, gives them more space. If that's something that we notice coming up over and over again, I think it's a really interesting question, is to monitor and be aware of what's happening here. What are you noticing is happening in your own people? What's happening with the people that you're dealing with? And what could work in this situation? That's great.
And I think actually, Janine, it reminds me that one of the things that's really helpful is in these kind of sessions and others like this, is to just talk with people who are in different types of mediation models, because I think in some places, some people have built in some of those, maybe not for these reasons and not recognizing it, but I'm thinking child protection has evolved to a particular pattern where there will always be the pre-meetings separately, and they're usually a few days apart from the mediation. And it's not unusual to schedule fairly significant breaks during the day, and often it is in relation to those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I know that increasingly a lot of family mediators schedule things in 2-hour blocks, meeting over various periods. And again, I think that it probably, it may or may not be a specific and conscious reaction to the neuroscience, but I suspect that a lot of
Yeah.
it is what people are discovering. So I suspect that a bunch of different areas could inform each other about exactly those kinds of things.
Yeah,
Wow, does this work?
online mediation is
Yeah.
a good example
Exactly.
of that, because usually you can't do it for more than 2.5
Right.
hours.
Yeah.
So
So it's
it's
got
going to be
some-
interesting
yeah.
to see. That's already built in there.
Yeah, the various online models, actually, I think that would be a fantastic place to look at how that changes different anxiety levels and things and reactions.
Well, I also think
Things
there's
too.
also in caucus, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about a lot of business negotiations, for example, can't afford to take a break, can't afford to go back, because the timing is critical, is a key component of leverage or whatever, or utility for one party or another. And so how do you manage that? Well, I think how we utilize our time apart, or our caucus times in private meetings, is also really, this could be informed by this too. What are you sending them out to do in a mediation, for example, in a caucus? Where are they going? Do they need to blow off some steam? Do they need to go for a walk? Do they need your permission to just, go off and walk it out, or go get some chocolate, or go and get a pen and a piece of paper and write down your thoughts? How are we using that time as well? Yeah. So, thanks for coming. I've been really, this has been for me too, right? Like I do this for me because I like to find out what you all are thinking about it and how it's resonating with you. And I'm happy to chat with anybody who's interested more in what I'm doing here. And I'd love to continue the conversation. Sue's going to continue it next week on resilient, or next
June.
month, June,
2 months
on resilience. So that'll be really interesting to take part in that for what we can do for ourselves too. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.